If you're 45, earning around $45,000 a year, and quietly convinced you've missed your chance to retire with any kind of dignity, here's what the actual math says. You probably haven't. Not if you start now, not if you build this the right way, and not if you stop letting the financial industry's advice for high earners convince you that their numbers apply to your life. That's what this conversation is about. Not inspiration, not generic advice recycled from a personal finance textbook. Specific, honest, mathematically grounded thinking about what someone in your exact situation can realistically build over 20 years, what it actually requires, and where most people in your position go wrong before they even get started. Let me begin with a number that will reframe everything.
You do not need $1.2 million to retire. That figure, which gets repeated constantly in financial media, is built around someone spending significantly more than you currently earn. If your actual retirement spending need is $30,000 to $35,000 annually, which for many people living on $45,000 pre-tax today is a realistic target, then the portfolio you need to build is substantially smaller than that headline number. Using the 4% withdrawal guideline as a rough working estimate, a $30,000 annual draw requires $750,000 in savings. A $25,000 draw requires $625,000. And once you factor in Social Security income, which I'll get to with real numbers shortly, the gap your savings actually needs to fill shrinks further. That's the core arithmetic of your situation. Now let's build the framework to reach it. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. The numbers I'll share throughout this conversation are approximations grounded in historical data and reasonable assumptions. They are not guarantees. Your actual outcome will depend on your health, your local cost of living, your investment returns during your specific window, future tax policy, and a range of other variables that no one can predict with certainty. I'll flag the key assumptions as we go. A fee-only financial planner, one who charges by the hour and earns no commission on what you buy, can help you build a version of this tailored to your specific numbers. Hourly rates vary considerably depending on location and experience, but the investment in a session or two with a qualified professional is typically worth many times its cost in clarity and avoided mistakes. The National Association of Personal Financial Advisors maintains a directory of fee-only planners at napfa.org, if you want to find one near you. With that said, let's get into it. The first thing you need to understand is that retirement is not about accumulating a specific pile of money. It's about replacing a specific level of income from non-work sources. The moment your investment income, Social Security income, and any other passive income together cover what you need to live on, you are retired. That reframe matters because it shifts the question from the paralyzing, how do I save $1 million, to the much more tractable, how do I replace $30,000 a year, and how much of that does Social Security already cover? On Social Security, let me give you something concrete rather than a range so vague it's useless.
Go to ssa.gov right now and create a My Social Security account. It takes about 10 minutes. What you'll find there is your actual projected benefit calculated from your real earnings history. I can give you a general illustration. Someone who has worked consistently for roughly 25 or more years at an average income in the $40,000 to $45,000 range, claiming at their full retirement age of 67, typically sees a projected benefit somewhere in the range of $16,000 to $20,000 annually, but your number could be meaningfully different depending on the specific shape of your work history, years with very low earnings, and years with higher earnings. Check your actual record. That number is the foundation of your retirement income plan. Everything else you build is designed to cover the gap between that number and what you need. And here's the decision embedded inside that number that most people in your situation don't think about carefully enough. Every year you delay claiming Social Security past your full retirement age, up to age 70, your monthly benefit grows by approximately 8%. That's not investment return. That's a formula built into federal law. If your projected benefit at 67 is $1,600 a month, waiting until 70 to claim brings it to roughly $2,070 per month. Over a 20-year retirement, that difference, compounded across hundreds of monthly payments, is a very significant sum. Whether delaying makes sense for you personally depends on your health, your other income sources in the years between retirement and 70, and your marital situation. It's a calculation worth doing, not a universal recommendation. But most people in your income range who delay to 70 come out ahead if they live into their mid-70s or beyond. Now let's build the actual saving and investing framework in the sequence that actually matters. Sequence is the most underappreciated concept in personal finance for people starting in their mid-40s. Two people can invest in identical assets for identical periods of time and arrive at completely different outcomes based purely on the order in which they handle their finances. Getting the sequence right matters more than optimizing any individual component. Here's the sequence. The first step is building a small financial buffer before anything else. Not a 6-month emergency fund, which is the correct long-term goal, but feels overwhelming as a starting point. $1,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account separate from your checking account that you do not touch except for a genuine disruption, a car repair that can't wait, an unexpected medical bill, something that would otherwise put new charges on a high-interest credit card. The reason this comes first is mechanical, not motivational. If you begin redirecting money toward retirement without this buffer, the first unexpected expense you encounter will either force an early withdrawal from a retirement account, triggering taxes and penalties, or add to high-interest debt that costs more than your investments are likely to earn. One disruption without a buffer can set back 18 months of progress. $1,000 prevents that. Build it first. The second step is capturing any employer retirement match that's available to you. This is the highest returning financial decision available to most employed people, and I want to explain why precisely rather than just asserting it. Take a concrete example. Suppose your employer matches 50% of your 401k contributions up to 6% of your salary. On a $45,000 salary, 6% is $2,700 annually from you. Your employer adds $1,350 on top of that automatically. That's a 50% guaranteed immediate return on the money you contributed before any investment gains occur. The stock market, over long periods, has historically returned roughly 7 to 10% annually on average. An immediate 50% return dwarfs that. If you are currently contributing less than the match threshold, increasing to that level should be your first financial move after the buffer is built. The third step is addressing high-interest debt, and I want to be specific about what qualifies. Any debt carrying an interest rate above roughly 7 to 8% should be treated as a financial priority before adding incremental investment beyond the employer match. The logic is straightforward. If you carry a credit card charging 22% interest while simultaneously investing in a portfolio that might return 7 to 10% on average, you're paying more in guaranteed interest than you're earning in probable returns. Paying down that card is a guaranteed 22% return. Nothing in your investment portfolio comes close to that with the same certainty. The most mathematically efficient method for multiple debts is the avalanche approach. Pay minimums on everything, then direct all surplus toward the highest interest rate debt. When that's gone, roll the freed up payment to the next highest rate. Continue down the list. This minimizes total interest paid over the payoff period. Let me make that concrete with a realistic scenario. The names and details in the examples I'm about to share have been changed or composited, but the financial situations and outcomes are representative of patterns that repeat themselves across a wide range of people in similar circumstances. Take someone I'll call David. He's 46, an administrative services coordinator, earning $47,000 a year in a mid-sized city in Ohio. When he sat down to honestly review his finances, he found $400 a month going toward a credit card at 19%, a personal loan at 11% with about $6,000 remaining, and a car payment at 5%. He had no retirement savings beyond a dormant 401k from a previous employer with about $8,000 in it. He was making minimum payments across all three debts and had been doing so for several years. David's first move was building the $1,000 buffer, which took him about 6 weeks by temporarily pausing a gym membership he rarely used and reducing his dining out from roughly $300 to $150 a month. Once that buffer was in place, he enrolled in his current employer's 401k at the 3% contribution level required to capture his employer's full match, which added 1.5% of his salary and employer contributions automatically. His take-home pay dropped by less than he expected, partly because the pre-tax contribution reduced his taxable income. Then he attacked the credit card at 19% with everything he could redirect. He paid it off in 14 months. He rolled that freed-up payment to the personal loan. That was gone in 8 months after that. The car payment he continued paying normally since the 5% rate was below his investment return threshold. From the point his credit card was paid off, he increased his 401k contribution from 3% to 8%, capturing additional tax advantages and compounding time. By 52, 6 years after starting, David had roughly $68,000 in his 401k, no high-interest debt, and was contributing $600 a month into his retirement account. The math from that point forward, with 15 years of compounding remaining, changed his outcome substantially. What made David's situation work was not unusual income or a fortunate investment. It was the sequence and the consistency. Both of those things are available to you. Now let's talk about where you invest the money you're saving, because this is where people often overcomplicate things or get sold something that benefits their advisor more than them. For the vast majority of people in your income range and time horizon, a diversified portfolio built around low-cost broad market index funds is the evidence-based choice. Let me explain what that means in practical terms. A broad market index fund is a single investment that holds shares in a large number of companies simultaneously, tracking the overall performance of a market index. A total U.S. stock market index fund, for example, holds thousands of publicly traded American companies across all sizes and sectors, giving you exposure to the broad U.S. economy without requiring you to pick individual stocks or pay a manager to do it for you. An S&P 500 index fund does something similar but focuses on the 500 largest U.S. companies. Both are widely available through major providers like Vanguard, Fidelity, and Schwab, typically at very low annual costs. Why does the cost matter so much? Because investment fees compound against you just as returns compound for you. A fund charging 1.2% annually in fees versus a comparable index fund charging 0.05% may seem like a trivial difference on paper. Over 20 years, on a portfolio of $300,000, that difference in fees can consume tens of thousands of dollars in returns that would otherwise belong to you. The financial services industry has a strong incentive to sell you actively managed funds. The data on whether those funds consistently outperform their low-cost index equivalents after fees does not support the premium most of them charge. Inside your 401k, you may have limited fund choices depending on what your employer has selected. Look at the expense ratio, the annual fee expressed as a percentage listed next to each available fund. Choose the lowest cost, broadly diversified option available. If your plan includes a total market index fund or an S&P 500 index fund at a low expense ratio, that is generally your best starting point. A target date fund is also worth understanding. These are single funds that hold a mix of stocks and bonds and automatically shift toward a more conservative allocation as you approach your target retirement year. A target date 2045 fund, for example, currently holds a growth-oriented mix and will gradually reduce equity exposure as 2045 approaches. They are not perfect instruments, but for someone who wants a one-fund solution that handles allocation automatically, they are a reasonable and often low-cost option available in most employer plans. Let me now walk through a more complete projection of what consistent investing looks like over 20 years, with honest caveats attached. Suppose you're 45, earning $45,000, and you manage to contribute $500 per month into tax-advantaged accounts, including employer match. That's $6,000 annually at a 7% average annual return, which reflects rough historical averages for a diversified equity portfolio and is not a guarantee for any specific future period that grows to approximately $260,000 over 20 years. If you can reach $650 per month in contributions, which is achievable if you eliminate high-interest debt and redirect that payment to retirement savings, the same calculation produces roughly $338,000. Add to that a paid-off home, which we'll discuss in a moment, and Social Security income in the range of $16,000 to $20,000 annually, and you begin to see a retirement picture that is genuinely workable for someone whose annual living expenses are in the $30,000 to $35,000 range. Not wealthy, not without trade-offs, but financially stable, with real options about how you spend your time. These are rough projections. A 7% average return over 20 years is historically plausible, but not guaranteed. Markets during your specific window could return more or less. Running your numbers through a retirement calculator using multiple return scenarios, including a conservative scenario around 5%, will give you a more robust picture of your range of outcomes. Now let's add the housing dimension, because for most people in your income range, it's the largest variable in the retirement equation. If you own a home with a mortgage, paying it off before or around retirement is one of the most powerful financial levers available to you. Here's why the math is so compelling. Suppose your monthly mortgage payment is $1,200. If you enter retirement with that mortgage still outstanding, you need $1,200 a month, $14,400 annually from your retirement income just to cover housing. That requires an additional $360,000 in your portfolio at a 4% withdrawal rate. Alternatively, if your mortgage is paid off when you retire, that entire income requirement disappears. One practical way to accelerate payoff without dramatically restructuring your budget is making one additional principal payment per year. On a 30-year mortgage, making one extra payment annually can reduce the loan term by several years depending on your current amortization position. The earlier in the loan you are, the more of each payment goes to interest and the more impact an additional principal payment has. You can calculate your specific payoff acceleration using any free mortgage amortization calculator online in about 3 minutes. The result will give you a concrete payoff date and the exact dollar amount you'd save in interest. Let me illustrate this with another example from the same category of composite situations I described earlier. Take someone I'll call Susan. She's 47, a licensed practical nurse earning $48,000 annually in a mid-sized southeastern city. She bought her home at 38 on a 30-year mortgage with a balance of $140,000 remaining when she sat down to reassess her finances at 47. Her monthly payment was $980. Susan ran the amortization numbers and found that making one additional $980 payment per year, applied entirely to principal, would pay off her mortgage in roughly 22 years rather than 29. Instead of entering retirement at 67 with 7 years of mortgage payments remaining, she'd enter it with a fully paid off home. The difference in required retirement income between those two scenarios over a 20-year retirement runs into the hundreds of thousands of dollars in equivalent portfolio value. Susan's second discovery was that her employer offered a 403B with a match she hadn't been capturing fully. She'd been contributing 2% of her salary. The employer matched up to 4%. Increasing to 4% cost her approximately $28 per month in take-home pay after the tax reduction on the pre-tax contribution, and it added roughly $80 per month in employer contributions she hadn't been receiving. She made that change the same week she ran the mortgage calculation. These two decisions, made in the same afternoon, materially altered her retirement trajectory. Not because she found a clever investment or got lucky in the market, but because she looked carefully at the machinery of her own financial situation and adjusted two specific settings. Now, I want to address something that appears in almost every retirement planning conversation for people starting in their mid-40s and is almost always handled with either false reassurance or unnecessary alarm: the question of whether you can actually build enough. The honest answer is that it depends on too many variables for a definitive yes. What I can tell you is that the people who start at 45 on incomes like yours and reach retirement in a financially stable position share a specific set of behaviors, not a specific income level or investment genius. They automate their contributions so saving doesn't require a monthly decision. They leave the money alone when markets decline, which is behaviorally harder than it sounds. They make major financial commitments, a larger home, a new car, additional recurring expenses, with explicit attention to their retirement timeline. And they revisit their plan at least once a year, not to obsess over it, but to adjust contribution levels as income changes and to confirm the trajectory still makes sense. The people who don't make it, who arrive at 65 without the security they needed, typically share a different pattern. They saved what was left after spending rather than spending what was left after saving. They withdrew from retirement accounts during a difficult period and never rebuilt the balance. They carried high interest debt for years while simultaneously investing, paying more in guaranteed interest than they earned in probable returns. They made housing decisions in their late 40s that assumed continued income growth that didn't materialize. None of those failure patterns are inevitable. All of them are avoidable with the framework we've been discussing. I also want to spend a moment on healthcare costs in retirement because they are systematically underestimated in retirement planning content aimed at people in your income range, and the underestimation is genuinely dangerous. If you retire before age 65, you are not yet eligible for Medicare. The Affordable Care Act marketplace provides an option, and depending on your income in retirement, subsidies may be available. But unsubsidized individual premiums for someone in their early 60s can run anywhere from $400 to over $1,000 per month, depending on your location, the plan tier you choose, and your specific health situation. If you're planning to retire at 62 and bridge 3 years to Medicare, you need to know your specific premium before finalizing that plan, not estimate it. Healthcare.gov allows you to browse actual marketplace plans and premiums for your zip code with real current numbers. After Medicare kicks in at 65, costs continue in a different form. Medicare Part B premiums, supplemental coverage to fill Medicare gaps, prescription drug coverage, dental and vision, which original Medicare does not cover. Studies of average retiree healthcare spending suggest a retired individual can expect to spend several $100s per month in total healthcare-related costs in their late 60s and early 70s, with that figure rising as they age. These costs belong on a separate line in your retirement budget, not folded into a general living expenses estimate, because they behave differently than other expenses and tend to grow faster than general inflation. Now let me give you a third example, drawn from the same category of composite situations I've described throughout this conversation, because this one illustrates a different starting configuration that many people will recognize. Take someone I'll call Ray. He's 45, a warehouse supervisor in the Pacific Northwest, earning $43,000 a year. He had roughly $11,000 in a 401k from a previous employer that he had rolled into an IRA and then ignored for 4 years. He had a car loan at 8.5% with $9,000 remaining, a credit card with $4,000 at 21%, and a mortgage with 19 years left on it. He rented out a basement room in his home for $550 a month, which he had been spending rather than directing toward anything specific. Ray's first move was to redirect that rental income entirely toward the credit card at 21%. He paid it off in 7 months. He then split the freed up payment, putting half toward the car loan and half into his 401k, bringing his contribution to 5%, which captured his full employer match of 2.5%. The car loan was gone in another 11 months. At that point, 18 months after starting, Ray redirected the full freed up amount from both the credit card and car loan into his 401k contribution, bringing it to 9%. His employer match continued at 2.5%, bringing the effective contribution to 11.5% of his salary. He also opened a Roth IRA and began contributing $200 a month. By 55, 10 years in, Ray's accounts had grown to roughly $180,000 across the 401k and Roth IRA combined, driven by contributions, employer match, and compounding growth. His mortgage had 12 years remaining, and he was making one extra payment per year, on track to pay it off at 64. His Social Security projection, when he checked his actual record, showed a benefit of approximately $17,000 annually at 67. Ray's retirement picture at 65 is not opulent, but it is stable. A paid-off home, roughly $290,000 in invested assets, Social Security covering the majority of his annual expenses, and a rental income stream from the basement that he intends to maintain, which adds another $6,000 annually if the tenant situation continues. His required portfolio withdrawal to cover his actual spending needs is modest. The math works. Ray didn't find a clever investment. He didn't start a business. He redirected money that was already in his life in a specific sequence over a sustained period. That is the repeatable element. Before we reach the end of this conversation, I want to say one thing directly about the noise that surrounds personal finance in your income bracket, because I think it causes real harm. Most of what is marketed to you as retirement advice is either designed for people with significantly higher incomes, designed to sell you a financial product, or designed to generate engagement through alarm. The content that tells you you'll never retire on $45,000 is often produced by people who have a financial interest in your anxiety. The content that tells you a simple trick will generate $1 million in 5 years is produced by people who have a financial interest in your hope. The honest version of this conversation sits between those two positions. You are not doomed. You are not going to find a shortcut. You have a 20-year window that responds to consistent, disciplined action applied in the right sequence to your actual financial situation. The people who succeed in your position are not smarter or luckier. They are consistent. That is the variable that determines the outcome more than any other. Here is what I would like you to do in the next 7 days, not the next month, the next 7 days. Go to ssa.gov and look up your actual projected Social Security benefit. Write the number down. This is income you have already earned through your working history. You deserve to know what it is. Log into your employer's HR system and find out exactly what your 401k matching formula is and exactly what percentage you are currently contributing. If there is a gap between what you're contributing and what's required to capture the full match, calculate what it would cost in monthly take-home pay to close that gap and decide whether you can implement it immediately. Pull 3 months of spending data from your bank and credit card accounts. Find your 3 largest discretionary spending categories, not rent or utilities or groceries, the categories that represent choices rather than fixed obligations. Identify one of them where you could reduce spending by $100 to $150 a month without meaningfully diminishing your quality of life. That redirection, compounded over 20 years, adds more to your retirement than it costs today. Write down every debt you carry outside of your mortgage with the balance and interest rate next to each one. That list is the beginning of your debt elimination sequence. These 4 actions taken this week constitute a real beginning built on your real numbers, not a hypothetical plan built on someone else's assumptions. If you found this conversation genuinely useful, the next video in this series goes into Social Security timing in detail, specifically how to calculate the break-even age for delaying your claim, how your decision interacts with a spouse's benefit if that applies to your situation, and the tax implications of different claiming strategies. It's one of the most consequential decisions people in your income range make, and it's almost always made without enough information. That video is linked from this one. Watch it next. And if you know someone navigating this same territory, a colleague, a family member, a friend carrying that quiet anxiety about retirement on a modest income, share this with them. The framework we covered today applies to a very large number of people who are not being well served by the advice that exists for them. Passing it along costs you nothing and might change how someone thinks about the next 20 years of their financial life. 20 years from now, you will be somewhere. The only question is whether you chose where or whether the years chose for you. The people who built financial security on ordinary incomes did not have better circumstances than you. They had the same weeks you have right now, and they used one of them to start. The math does not care how you feel about your situation. It only responds to what you do next. Start the sequence.